Blake, what's your greatest fear in this world when it comes to me?
Giving you a mic in a live environment shaves years off of my life.
Welcome to the Church Gear Podcast, where we pull the tech out of the booth and onto the stage to share the most outlandish stories and hidden wisdom from the tech trenches. And now, here are your hosts.
I'm your host, Blake Hodges, a man who spends 78% of his waking hours editing things Toby has said on our content. And I'm here with my co-host who thought he was a one-take wonder this entire time, Toby Walters.
I am a one-take wonder, but I wonder, Blake, if this take will even work since there's no video of us up on the monitors.
I never turned the video on. You should just keep talking. I'm going to go turn the video on live.
So, as Blake is, oh, dear Lord, we're leaving the tech to Blake as he's connected to his ears and his cable is okay. Anyways, so Blake, I still remember we were at the Churchfront conference in 2022, and this was the first time, at least in Church Gear time frame, that I had spoken in front of a live audience. I was doing a breakout class on like worship on a budget. Apparently, that's my area of expertise.
That's your shtick, and be careful where you go with the story.
Oh, I know.
This is not.
Although we edit this podcast.
We can't even tell this on Church Gear After Dark.
So you said, now, Toby, just a reminder, you're going to be in a live environment. I can't edit you, so don't say anything inappropriate. And I'm like, okay, got it. Like acting like I'm reminding myself not to be inappropriate. And then I said, Blake, by the way, how do you, and then I said like the most wildly inappropriate thing I could possibly think of.
Which you are to never repeat, even in a live setting.
And you're just freaking out. Toby, you can't say that. Oh, it's so funny to mess with you and just watch you freak out sometimes.
If you've ever seen the episode where Dwight and Michael Scott go into the ocean or the lake in their car and they're freaking out,
yep.
That was me and Toby in that moment.
I wasn't freaking out.
Well, I was Dwight, though, freaking out on you, yes. Michael Scott.
So very recently, and I don't know why these people let me come and speak on, and it's always like
because you badger them
on a budget.
You badger them.
I'm
you
kind
wear
of
them down.
Annoying. I went down to Exponential Conference in Orlando and got to speak again on worship and tech on a budget. And Blake, you know me, like I rub two nickels together and I'm like, we can produce anything we can possibly dream of. So somehow I turned that concept into content that hopefully is helpful for worship and production people at churches of any size. So some of the tips we talked about, obviously church gear. So we're saying, hey, you might want to consider sometimes buying used gear. Sometimes buying used gear is absolutely the right decision.
I've never bought used gear a day in my life.
Well, you wouldn't even know what to do with it. So it doesn't matter
true.
If it's new or used for you. And then obviously sell your old gear. I got my handbell story. I won't tell it here, but that's one of my favorites. Some of the other stuff, we talked about, it totally depends on your context. Like know what you're trying to achieve before just buying stuff willy-nilly. Our buddy Nick Kofal loves to say gear follows vision.
Yep.
Like know where you're going first. And then just the general idea, and this has been kind of a hot take recently, and I know even like Shep said this about elevation, like there's only one elevation. You're not elevation, so stop trying to just be elevation. Be yourself. And so before you go invest in gear and processes and people, just realize who you are and what you're trying to do, and don't just try and copy somebody else. But Blake, I would never refer to you as adult supervision. What would you be?
I'm youth supervision. I do supervise the youth at church, and I said on the podcast recently.
What's the opposite of supervision? Because that would be you.
Undervision?
Undervision, sure. So
amateur
you were like,
vision?
Yeah,
I'm
whatever.
the youth amateur vision.
But they at Exponential, they said, we'd love to have you come speak. We're going to pair you, though, with adult supervision. So I did have a co-host at Exponential.
You cheated on me, Toby.
But yes, he was, as far as you can get on the adult range and still call him adult, he's adult supervision.
All right. Well, bringing in adult supervision is the Director of Client Relations of Avenue Systems, Terry Rhodes. Terry, are you in fact adult supervision?
If that's what Toby wants to call me, I guess I'll take it.
Terry, that's my stance on this podcast. You're fitting right in.
Especially since when I walked in the room, I found a whiteboard that said old guy pointing to my name.
Yeah, I did, class hack, and I put old guy equals Terry, young guy equals Toby. That's all you
Young-
needed to know.
Young by whose definition? My goodness.
By Terry's definition.
Don't let him talk to you that way, Terry.
And Terry, did I say anything inappropriate in that room? Do you remember?
Not that I recall, but apparently the older you get, the more you forget. So,
Toby, you know how I know he's not saying something he wants to say? In Congress, they say, like, if you're under a hearing, you say, I do not recall. That's what you say to an answer you don't want to answer.
I'm sorry, I do not recall.
I'm sorry, I do not recall.
Yeah.
Terry, we're hoping you can recall your production background. What moments in your life, the high points, led you to this moment where you're having to be adult supervision in an AVL class with Toby?
that's a great question. I don't know that I can go to the moment it happened because it kind of does a lot of things morphed over a little bit of time. I happened to grow up in a family that dad was the pastor, mom was the church pianist, so I was involved from the time I was in diapers, it feels like. And early in life, I was a musician. And at some point, dad equated musician and production kind of being synonymous and started handing me responsibility in production. And I still couldn't even drive. I had no clue what it was, but decided, okay, if you believe in me, I'll try it. And then over the course of a few years and getting connected with some folks that understood way more than me, I began to make sense of it. And at some point, it's like, I think I could do this.
And what were some of those big moments in your life, the key roles you had at churches or tours you were a part of, or, what were some of those highlights in your production background?
I didn't do the touring thing. I worked with a local regional production company early, so we were just doing the local shows in and around the Midwest where I grew up. And it kind of started initially, I was doing some rodeo work. We had a big rodeo that came to town every year, and a production company asked me to come be a part. Over time, it went from being a part to getting to mix. And that's kind of when I fell in love, when I kind of realized as a musician, I get to be, this is probably a control freak thing, but I get to control the sound of everything. And it kind of sparked this interest in me that ultimately led me to a path that has now had about 40 years of doing that.
And so what year did you get started, Terry? Roughly.
It was around 1987, 1988. I can't remember exactly, but it was somewhere around there.
So for the youngins in the room, Blake, does that mean are you young anymore?
I'm 31. I'm middle-aged now,
you're
Toby.
middle-aged, yeah. Especially with the way you eat.
Oh, yeah.
You might even be later in your life.
I've heard a lot about biological age. People eat broccoli to de-age, so I'm actually 48.
Uh-huh. So, Terry, what was production actually like in 1987, 1988 for those guys that are, 25 now and they're working on the fanciest, craziest gear that you could ever dream of back then?
It was drastically different. We had racks and racks and racks of outboard gear. And to qualify that would be for those of us in digital world now, all the little things that you can do with the push of a button on your console all used to happen with other pieces of gear that had to be physically connected and patched and routed. And so it meant you had oodles and oodles of geographical space just to do your job because of all of the pieces and parts that it took to make it happen. And somebody had to move all of that stuff, which is exactly where I started, just being a grunt moving it.
Yeah.
Over time, as technology changed and moved us forward, it became fewer and fewer pieces and parts, and the fewer and fewer pieces and parts did more and more stuff.
Yeah, it's amazing what an X32 today can do versus, $100,000 of outboard gear 40 years ago. It is
exactly,
wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, Blake,
and then everything took miles of cable because in today's digital world, with just a few different types of cables, you can connect thousands of pieces. Back then, it was an analog piece of copper to everything.
Yeah. Blake, when I first started in, doing sound at my church at age 13, and we're talking 92, 93, somewhere in there, so not too far off.
So the 1900s.
Yes, in the 1900s, there were, they called them security covers on some of the outboard gear because they didn't want kids like me touching them. So there was
Keep
literally
your grubby
like
mitts off the boards, Toby.
it was like the outboard gear. You'd have it in the rack, but it would then be put in prison behind steel grates, so you couldn't touch it.
They should put you in prison.
They still should, Blake. Terry, was there any lighting or video at, your church or where you were getting started with production, or was production back then? For me, it was just the sound system. That's all it was.
Yeah, we had a very, very modest lighting and a very modest video system. Our video system was an overhead projector where you take a transparency and lay it on this piece of glass with a light shooting it on a wall. It looked awful. It was black and white only at that time. And what little bit of lighting was just incandescent fixtures that were hot. You could get a sunburn if you were close enough to them, it felt like. And the only way to get color was to throw gel sheets or something with color in front of the light. And you just want to make sure you weren't too close to it because it'd burn you in a minute.
Yeah.
It sounds like a skin cancer risk already.
That's exactly.
Do you remember the first church or moment where you walked in? Like, I don't know, you ever worked with, like, Willow Creek was doing, big things in the 90s with lights and video, but very, very few churches back then. Do you remember the moment when you first walked into a church, were part of the production, where you're like, oh my gosh, they're using like real lights and video?
You're testing me here. I don't know that I actually remember that moment off the top of my head. Having been now in thousands and thousands of them, that there's always something unique about every one I walk into, but I don't know that I remember that first one.
Yeah. If you're training, young tech volunteers, do you miss the analog days where they have to touch everything and they have to patch everything? Or, there's some advantages today where it's like, yeah, just go ahead and mess around with the board, and when you're done, I'm going to press recall and it all goes away.
And there's a little bit of both. I think there's a tremendous amount of knowledge that can be gathered around understanding, if you were, core principles within the technologies that we work with. In the analog world, it kind of forces you to know those. Where in digital world, you can kind of make whatever, which is kind of strange to say, but ultimately that's the case. Is a lot of the gear that we have are basically glorified computers that we can make them what we want them to be. So folks can get themselves into trouble not understanding some of the basic principles.
And what are some of those basic principles that you're finding, people aren't learning enough of because they're jumping straight to analog or straight to digital these days?
There's so many different ones. I would say one that I've caught over and over and over is because of available resources that may or may not be good, folks tend to go online and look up information, and then they try to do what they saw online without understanding the qualifications behind it. And so a prime example of that one would be, I have gone in and watched guys not even turn a mic on, start EQing a channel to make it look like the way they saw it look on some video they watched somewhere, and never pay attention to how it sounds. And then they just do that times a number of potential input sources and realize that at the end of the day, they're really not understanding a mix. They're simply trying to create something they saw.
That's fascinating. Blake, even you could do that.
Imitation is the purest form of flattery.
That's right. Terry, I still remember hearing, I don't remember which mix engineer, but one of the top mix engineers in the world talking about EQ. And, as he was young, he constantly thought, I'm going to add EQ to make things sound better. And the older he got, the more he learned, the more he's like, no, I'm actually going to subtract. Subtraction is, the key to a great mix. Do you feel like, that's true? Like less is actually more, like don't EQ a thing, just put up all the faders and see what you got and then start taking away? How do you approach a mix in that way?
Yeah, actually, I'm very similar in that I am a subtractive mixer. When I started, a lot of what would be considered professional EQs, if you look at the old 31-band graphics, if you threw all the faders to the top, that was unity, and the only thing you could do was pull EQ out, which made us begin to think about what is it that I'm hearing. Of that, what do I not want to hear, as opposed to in today's technology, you can now add and or create something that's not there, which potentially introduces new issues. So subtractive EQ is kind of the core of where I think.
Yeah. Now you talk to us about, having been in thousands of churches and production environments in your 40 years. What are some of the common things, the common problems, mistakes, just, uneducated decisions that churches are making over and over again that you feel like every time I walk into a room, it's the first thing I have to fix or educate them on?
Well, that's a great question. One of them I would say, and I see this pretty commonly, is there's not a lot of long-term thought put into decision as opposed to a short-sighted make a decision and move. And a great example of that would be in today's world, we use a lot of wireless. And wireless in our world has been shrunk and purchased by other industries. And so we're getting limited. And ultimately, everybody wants wireless, but they don't think outside of a box big enough to realize all of this has to work together. And so they may go buy, for example, a really cheap wireless system and limit themselves to how many wireless they can actually use because they're not compatible once you get beyond just a few of them. And so ultimately, they decide over time that they want some more, they go buy another unit, and then they run into just oodles of problems. And nobody ever thought to realize that, hey, this has all got to work together, and we made a snap decision. And ultimately, they wind up potentially buying 2 or 3 times trying to eventually solve a problem that could have been resolved very early with a little bit of coordination and help.
So speaking on wireless specifically, are there, when you're talking and advising with churches and thinking long-term, what do you tell them as far as these are the good reasons to use wireless, these are the bad reasons? I'm thinking, typically it'd be really nice for a pastor to have wireless so he has free range of motion, but I often really struggle to find there's another good reason to have additional wireless. What are those, good reasons and bad reasons?
To not trip, Toby, over all the wires.
Yeah, exactly. Well, one of them, and we see this pretty commonly in today's church, is prior to the message and pastor coming out, there's a worship team that is utilizing some of the exact space that pastor's in. And it could be whether it's a worship leader or maybe an instrumentalist or whatever that may be located there. And when they're done, they want to, if you will, strike the stage, and it's fewer pieces and to have to move. So wireless has a distinct advantage when you do that for those same worship leaders that would be more downstage, even like their wireless ears, so that there are fewer pieces and parts they have to move. There are advantages in doing that. There are also costs, and you kind of have to weigh those to determine what's right for you.
Yeah. If we, expand the same kind of core idea, and we think, if you're talking to a church and they magically have millions of dollars, because don't we all? And they say, I want 32 channels of wireless. I want giant LED screens. I want an immersive audio system. And there's no forethought to how, and why they want to do these things. They've seen them at other places and they think they're cool. Where do you start to draw back to the beginning? If a church automatically says, I want an LED wall, do you say, well, have you thought about a laser projector? Have you looked at the differences? If they want an immersive system, have you said, well, have you thought about just a left-right system? Where do you try and start with churches?
I generally try to get from the perspective, one, of the why. But with that why is also initially is trying to understand them. What's the DNA, or what's that core set of values that encompasses who that ministry is? Because if I understand who they are and I understand the why, it's much easier to help lead a conversation towards decisions that support that, as opposed to just simply making a sale. And I think at the end of the day, my role often is helping align expectations and reality and budgets with these folks. But if I can point it back to, this is who you tell me who you are, these are the things you say that matter to you. So when you lead me down a path that doesn't speak to that, it gives me the right to kind of speak up and say, there's some confusion here, either on my part or maybe the way you explained it, I didn't get it. But it helps them to hear back what they've told me and now how this potentially may contradict that or reinforce it, whatever the case may be.
Yeah. And besides wireless, what are, the most common or a couple of the most common ways in which churches uneducatingly want to spend money when you have to get back to the why and say they're, you just kind of, you scrunch up your forehead and you're like, here we go again. You don't need to spend money on this. There's a cheaper solution.
Yeah. What gives your forehead that same feeling that you had whenever Toby was talking at Exponential?
Oh gosh, that's great. Aside from wireless and LED walls being two of the major ones, the other one that I get sometimes is there are requests for a specific piece of gear. And that piece of gear can be a lot of different things with no understanding on their part as to why they're asking for it, other than they saw it somewhere and felt like whatever their experience there was, if they had the same thing, they could now create that experience where they are. Which there again speaks back to where I was going before, is that particular situation was somewhere else. It wasn't your congregation, your group of people. It was something that fit theirs, and now you're trying to mold that into you, and that may not necessarily be you, but that happens to be the cool piece of gear. And I think a specific example of that might be a line array. I have oodles and oodles people come to me, I want a line array. Like, well, I understand you want a line array, but let's understand your space first.
Yeah.
If it's not suited for a line array, if I do this, I'm not doing you justice. I'm simply making a transaction happen.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, we're not a transactional company. We are a partnering company. We want to understand you so that we can support your vision, not simply provide you with things that you think you want and need.
Yeah. On that kind of like personal preference bandwagon, I visit so many churches and their production people will give me a tour of their system, their spaces, their setup. And so many times I'll be like, that's interesting. And I'm trying to be nice when I say that's interesting. Blake, what do you like to say when we use the word interesting?
Interesting is the adjective people use when they don't want to say how they really feel.
So I'll look at a decision that was made or the setup and I'll say like, that's interesting. Why did you go with that? And without fail, they'll say that was the previous person's preference.
Yes.
And we just have to make it work now. Like, how often do you have to, try and educate people to say, I know you think you want it that way, but the next person's going to hate that because it doesn't make any sense.
I would agree wholeheartedly with that. I have heard more times than I could count that I walk in and somebody says, yeah, this is what got handed to me.
Yeah. What are some of the ways that you help churches think long-term of, is it simplifying the gear? Is it simplifying the setup? How do you help churches think long-term in that there's going to be other people after you that are going to have to run this system?
I think it's a couple of things. One of them, for us, it's something that we stress heavily, is we help them understand infrastructure first. Especially if they're building a new facility, you get a great opportunity to create pathways between a lot of different spaces while there's open air to do it, which results in a lot of flexibility down the road, helping them understand things like power needs that may not be today, but down the road are going to matter. So the infrastructure side of it, I think, is a big piece, is helping them understand right now this supports you, but long-term, this is simply not going to be adequate because as you continue to grow, those needs are going to change. So helping them understand early there's some infrastructure needs that they're going to have to address.
And what are some, I did a lot of stuff myself growing up in a small church. We didn't have any budget. We couldn't afford an integrator. So I ran cables. I, plugged in mics and mixers. What are some of the stuff that churches can and should do themselves? And what are some things that they should absolutely stay away from and call professionals?
Yeah, that's a great question. From the can't side of it, to me, that's pretty easy. And it's really things that speak to safety. And a great example of that is, unless you've been certified as a rigger or you've got professional training, hanging things that have weight over the tops of people is a huge risk. especially from the standpoint of whether you take a speaker or a projector or a heavy moving light or something like that. If you don't understand, one, the structure and what it's capable of supporting, and two, how to secure whatever that piece is, and now you're putting people under it, all it takes is something to fall. And you're putting yourself, you're putting the church, you're putting a lot of people at a safety risk. So that piece, I heavily encourage folks, if you don't have that background and this isn't your skill set, it's not that you can't hang something up there, but you're putting a lot of people at risk that have no safety net to them. So I would say that as far as what you can do, obviously pulling cable, that's a simple one. You can physically move stuff from place to place. You can try various ways of patching between systems, et cetera. You want to think it through as opposed to just go willy-nilly and not even have a plan. But ultimately, a lot of that stuff you can do. You can do your own research and find out how to compare between two different lighting fixtures, or if you want to do LED versus another type of projection solution. A lot of things like that you can do, but the safety aspect is one that I warn heavily against.
And I remember you mentioning a story from, was it a church in Colorado where the speakers came down, and what happened there?
Yeah, there was a ministry that had a huge speaker cluster that hung right over the teaching position for pastor. And I don't remember what it was that caused it, but the speaker cluster fell. It landed on pastor, killed him on the spot in the middle of service. And ultimately, that congregation obviously was devastated. I'm sure that there was a lot of litigation that then came into play with them and the insurance company. And I don't know that I know who hung it, but ultimately there was a huge repercussion outside of the fact that pastor has now lost his life.
Blake, are you suddenly looking over your head at what could come down on us?
I have been looking over my head since I started this podcast because there's stuff hanging all the time and it scares me. And Terry, you just gave me a very good reason to make sure my seats at AMC are never under the speaker. I look up now. By the time this comes out, we'll have eclipsed 170 episodes. That's a top 3 worst one.
Yeah.
I can't. Oh my gosh. I cannot even fathom just watching my pastor die right in front of me.
Do you ever walk through the church gear warehouse and kind of look up and be like, I'm going to move over here a little bit? Or do you do that every time?
How real do we want to be? I hate going back there because there's stuff so high. It scares me. I'm afraid for those guys back there.
So we put in our racks, and we put in pallet racks in our warehouse, and we have Frank, our operations director, who is Safety Sergeant. That's his nickname around here. But I remember putting up those pallet racks, and we put, I don't know how many thousands of pounds of speakers on those pallet racks. And he's telling me over and over again, Toby, this is completely safe because we did it correctly. It's all rated for that. It's all correctly, strapped and rigged up there. And still, like, for the first week or so, I had a hard time sleeping because I just imagined that giant wall of speakers.
Well, yeah, you just imagine you get a text that one of your employees has died.
Yeah.
And now you're like, well, crap, I got to go find another employee.
Finding good help is hard.
I hope it was Blake. We're laughing about this because we don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
I mean, that is devastating.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like on DIY, don't rig stuff unless you really, 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 really know.
Yeah. If it can fall down and kill somebody, just don't do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, heck, if we're putting outboard gear back in the day behind prison walls because we don't want kids to touch it, we certainly don't need people rigging stuff that are not qualified.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, what's the saying now? Common sense isn't so common anymore.
Yep, because, Blake, your generation just grows up with the internet and TV. And so you never learned to do actual real things in like a workshop or a garage.
YouTube University taught me how to do it, Toby. It's fine.
All right, Blake. Is that the sound effect we're still using?
We really got to get a new sound effect for torture Toby time.
I know. Well, we're going to baffle Blake instead of torturing Toby.
Boo.
And we're going to baffle Blake with bits of information about blunders, blessings, and boom mics, bordering on buffoonery.
All right. Well, apparently we're going to baffle me in this week's sponsored segment by HouseRite of Baffle Blake. And HouseRite specializes in integration for new buildings and renovations specifically for churches. They'll work alongside your architects to create spaces that look great, and perform flawlessly for your church's unique worship experience. A room that sounds great is more than just gear. It's intentional design that starts long before construction. So trust our friends at HouseRite to do that, where they'll make sure your room minimizes distractions so the message is clearly heard and the space facilitates an impactful worship experience. And if you're not looking for your next project, but you are looking personally for your next job, I know we all are. I know I'm doing it every night. Did I mention they're hiring? Visit them at houserite.com to see their projects and open job opportunities.
All right, Terry. So in this segment of Baffle Blake, we're going to pit you against Blake, and we're going to go with some old school church production trivia.
And
now,
the loser has a cluster of speakers dropped on them.
Yep. So it'll be funny if, I have these questions and I say what the answer is, and then Terry's like, no, that's actually wrong, because Terry actually has been around since, the 80s, before you were even born, Blake.
Hey, you don't know when I was born.
93.
Also, shh. It's personal information. Also, Terry, the winner gets a HouseRite prize pack, so there's a lot on the line here.
There is.
Oh, nice.
And gets to rig some speakers with.
And then I'm sandbagging. I'm losing.
All right, so we have 5 questions, and you have to actually answer the question. It's not true or false this time, Blake, so it's getting harder. So good luck against Terry.
And I just choked on my own spit. Now I'm going to lose this game.
Now, Blake, I'm going to let you answer first each time. Okay, so question number 1. What was the dominant format? Wow, are you okay over there?
I'm
need
dying.
to cough? Yeah, you're just scared of this game. All right.
Yes.
Question number 1. What was the dominant format for church video production in the 1980s?
MP3? I don't know.
Terry, what's the answer?
Terry has full thrown his head back.
Yeah. In the 80s, we were using composite video and VHS.
Ding, ding, ding.
That's what I meant to say, Toby.
The correct answer was VHS. Yeah, MP3. Nice work, Blake. All right. Next up, what year was Pro Presenter first released, Blake?
1979.
That's when I was released
into the world.
Terry, what do you think? What was the first year it was released?
Pro Presenter. Ooh, gosh.
Closest answer wins.
It would be early 2000s. I don't know, maybe.
Just stop there, Terry, because early 2000s is correct. 2000 is the right answer. So very early 2000s. All right, it's 2-0, Blake.
I still got
destroyed.
this.
I love this.
Hey, I've seen Atlanta beat the Patriots. Or wait a minute, the Patriots beat Atlanta.
All right, Blake, you actually have a shot on this one. All right. What brand of analog mixing consoles was most popular in churches in the 80s and 90s?
Yamaha.
What do you say, Terry? And you can't say Yamaha now. Sorry, he took it.
Yeah, I can't. I can't say that. I tend to think he's right. The other one that comes to mind from that era would be Mackie.
Yeah, I thought Mackie, but the correct answer is Yamaha. So you got one right, Blake.
Nice.
As my father would say, a blind squirrel finds a nut.
I'm surprised you didn't say X32.
I really thought about Behringer. I really did.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, 2-1. Next up, what company's wireless mic systems were favored by mega churches in the 90s? Blake?
EAW.
Wow.
I mean, Sennheiser. I'm saying EAW, apparently.
Yeah, I don't remember them making.
No, nobody does, because it never happened.
Okay, all right. but if I remember right, in that time, EV or Electro Voice was big.
I'm sorry. I feel like I should give the point to Blake because it is Sennheiser.
Well, but I said EAW.
Ah, nice.
All right, let's just call it 2-2.
Okay,
this
it's
is
2-2.
great.
All right,
You can have it. You can have
For
it.
the HouseRite prize pack.
Yes, and $1 million of
There you go.
Shroot Bucks. All right, what year did the first Hillsong Church album release, marking a shift in global worship production values?
1864.
Now you're just throwing the game.
I'm going to say 2007.
2007. All right, Terry?
No, it was before that. It would have been late 80s, early 90s. So let's go with 1990.
Terry wins.
When was it?
Ah, nice.
I'm going to totally embarrass myself. I forgot to write down the answer, but I know it was in the 90s.
Well, I said
Yeah.
You said 2007.
And
Terry wins.
1864,
Yeah,
so you have to
1864.
average them.
All right.
Yeah,
So,
average them out.
yes, Terry, you want a prize back from our friends at House Right. And Blake, what do our
Nice.
friends at House Right have going on right now?
Hey, if you're looking for your next opportunity, if you know more than me, if you would have had a better answer than 1864, they are looking for some great people to join their integration team. So head over to houseright.com and you might have your next opportunity there. And if you're not looking for a job, but you are looking for an integrator to partner up with, you can also check them out at houseright.com.
So, Terry, we joked about Blake's generation and YouTube University. You even said it, Blake. Terry, do you have any thoughts on, the education that's out there on YouTube? What things are people able to learn these days that are great? And what kind of faulty information is out there, too, that YouTube is perpetuating?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think I alluded to this earlier in the conversation, is I mentioned the fact that I see people mix with their eyes, where they're looking at some video where it's showing maybe an EQ curve that was used on a pastor or a guitar or a tom or whatever that may be. And now they recreate that without listening to hear, am I getting the result that I want, as opposed to, does it look the way I remember seeing it on this particular. Some people I've even seen take screenshots with their phone and they just simply recopy this. I see that way too often, which makes it quite challenging. Aside from that, some of those basics of just, and I try to simplify everything I do, whether it's audio, video, lighting, broadcast, is get the basics down first. Quit worrying about this might be fun for some folks. Plugins have become this huge thing now, and they forget that you still have to, and we'll use the phrase, you still have to bake a cake before you put icing on it. So the cake being the fundamentals.
Depends on how much icing you put on that cake, Terry.
You can bake the icing.
Okay. At least in my world, I want more cake than I want icing. So I want to build the cake first. And those fundamentals help me create and build the cake that's desirable. And then the icing allows me to put the shimmer and shine on at the end. And I see a lot of folks who are taking some of the things that are great tools, but using them in the wrong way. And unfortunately on YouTube, it's hard to know which one is quote unquote giving you good information as opposed to it's just information.
Yeah. And you talk about mixing with your eyes, and I love kind of that analogy. And I kind of feel like that's all you can do when learning on YouTube. I'm not saying it's not helpful information and you can't learn a lot, but yes, you're learning to mix with your eyes, whereas mixing is truly an ear thing. And so is there a way to learn mixing with your ears rather than standing next to somebody at the board who is walking you through how to do it in the room and you're hearing what it's like in the room? Is that still just the obvious choice for learning that, Terry?
I think that's still one of the best scenarios out there. And I encourage people from the standpoint of, when I mix, a lot of times I close my eyes and I try to, if you will, envision me being in a space that I can't see, but am I getting the auditory result that puts a vision, although I'm not seeing? That vision is now coming very clear because my ears are pleased with what they hear. That can be done from all types of genres of music. You don't really have to hone in on a particular one. And I think that's part of what we struggle with, is understanding what's behind what they watch. So if they're watching, for example, something that has jazz music, well, how you mix that is uniquely different than if you're doing hip hop or whatever that other genre may be. So putting those perspectives together to understand that this is a scenario, it may not be your scenario.
Yeah, I was thinking, Blake, closing your eyes, and so you're not distracted by your eyes. Are there any great blind mix engineers? I'm thinking now, like, I haven't heard of it, and they probably have to mix on analog consoles because they'd have to actually touch and feel the knobs, but that'd be fascinating. You're going to open your eyes now, Blake? You just love the sound of my voice.
Trying to do this podcast like Daredevil, he can't see, but he's still lethal.
Yep. Terry, do you know of any blind mix engineers?
I don't know that I know any blind ones, but I've sure found a few deaf ones.
Blake, that's your new goal for this year. Find a blind mix engineer and let's get him on the podcast, or her. That'd be so fun.
That would be my honor.
Yeah.
Terry, we're clipping that, dude. That's probably going to be on social this week. I don't know any blind ones, but I know a couple deaf ones.
And, just thinking of closing your eyes, it reminded me of a post I saw just recently. I think it was our friend Abigail, who mixes a lot of monitors for different, major artists that, don't forget to look around the room and vibe check. Like, are people enjoying themselves? Or do you see their heads bobbing to the music? Or are they just disconnected? Like, just because you love the mix doesn't mean everybody else is. So how, Terry, how do you do a vibe check on the room to make sure everybody's going along with you?
I'm constantly monitoring the room. At the end of the day, regardless of the scenario, if it's not engaging the crowd that's there, I'm thinking, okay, what's missing or what's too much, or potentially is this too loud? Is this not loud enough? I mean, there are a lot of things that go into that. But if they're not engaging, there's something more that I need to do a lot of times. And ultimately, the artist or the group that may be leading that may have their challenges, but ultimately I have no control over that. I have the control over what I have, so I have to own that.
Toby, yeah. I think that's why you're so bad on this podcast is you don't have a room full of people to vibe check with. It's just you and me and these monitors in here.
Well, I often look over to you to vibe check to see if you're enjoying it, but you just always have like a stupid grin on your face. And I'm like, I think you're just always having fun in life.
I am. And also, now that we put a full-length version of the podcast on YouTube, I'm like, hey, Blake, you need to check in. You need to stay checked in the entire time. Your face
looks so stupid.
Don't look dumb. That'd be a disaster.
It would be a disaster. And you know what else is a disaster? That segue, Blake. Are we just going to do that every episode now? Like we just dog on each other's segues?
Every year we do a what's not working for our annual review. And I'm going to put that in my review, Toby.
We should actually sometime we should do a Segway tour in like downtown Nashville or something, and then make this whole thing is becoming a disaster. Terry, can you help us out here? Do you have just a great disaster story in production where everything went wrong, or maybe it almost went wrong and you saved the day?
Yeah, unfortunately, I probably have more than I can possibly remember, but one that I remember early in my career, it was at a ministry where they kind of just set up, leave stuff, and week to week, they just come in and do what they do. There was no real, if you will, line check. They didn't really rehearse. They just get up and do their thing. And so because we failed to do that, and apparently some kids at some point had got in and literally started moving some stuff around, everything was still patched, but it wasn't patched where you expected it. So pastor gets up to speak and has no mic because his mic is patched into, and I don't even remember what it was, but something that wasn't even being used that day. And it took several minutes of him talking to finally find and get him patched to work, which is embarrassing for one, but two, it's like, who would have thought that you just randomly start moving stuff? And so it became one of those that after service, I had to go to pastor and say, I don't know what happened, and I'm sorry, I should have checked it ahead of time, but here's some things that we might want to implement immediately. And that is, before every service, just do 3 minutes worth of check. Make sure what is there is, or what you expect to be there is there, and you don't have this moment again.
Now, Terry, that's on you, man. You didn't have the production prisons on all that gear that Toby had as a kid. Clearly, Toby was visiting that church that day and ran wild without the prisons being on them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's some just simple basics that should be practiced on a week-to-week basis. Even if you're not moving stuff, you never know that somebody else get in there and do something and you had no clue.
This should be a special place in Dante's Inferno for the kids that do this. Because, Terry, you're not the first person to tell us this. The youth group will suddenly just be in there, and I'm a product of the youth group, but they'll be in there and they'll just move everything around because they think it's fun. They think it's like Jenga. This is not a game.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just life and death.
Yes. Well, it could be hell or heaven for some people. Think about it.
Yeah. Well, and I think you hit on a key point there. One of the things that we talk about regularly when we go in and talk with these ministries is our idea is we want to create a distraction-free environment. Mm-hmm. So what we're doing has life implications. Take that part seriously. Don't take yourself too seriously. Take that and understand that we're setting you up for an opportunity to make a decision in an in an environment that's not full of distractions.
Toby, I just got a new tagline for our podcast: a distraction-filled environment.
There you go.
So you can get all your distractions out on our podcast so that Sunday you have no more distractions.
And you don't have to go to prison.
Yeah, that's right. I thought it'd be so funny if we said, Terry, can you share a disaster story? And he said, well, this one time I rigged up a cluster of speakers in Colorado.
I thought he was going to say,
this
one time I walked into this room and there was a sign that said old guy, and then I met Toby Walters.
That'd be amazing.
Yes.
Terry, you've learned a lot of takeaways throughout your time in church production. You've imparted some of them to us today, and we'd like one more, man. So what would be a tech takeaway that you could wrap our episode on that you would say to a room full of production people?
I think my key point every time I get the opportunity to teach and or work with a group of people is a 2-word phrase that to me resonates heavily, and it's simply, it depends. And regardless of the situation, if you're looking to make a decision around something or whatever you're going after, understanding that it depends or the why behind it. Do you need a wireless mic or a wired mic? Well, it depends. If it's pastor, you probably don't want him dragging a wired mic around, while at the same time you may have a guitar player that it's perfectly fine to have this cable connected, but he just wants wireless. Well, there are 2 different depends scenarios there. LED wall versus laser projector, another great example. It depends on what you're dealing with. I had a client one time that the back wall of the auditorium faced east, and it was full of windows. As the sun came up in the morning, it was just incredibly bright. We didn't have a projector bright enough to even put an image up. So an LED wall became a solution for that application because it was dependent upon, could you even see this image? So it depends is a big part of the conversation I have with clients.
Depends is also the branded diaper that Toby wears. He got shocked on an amp in the tech lab, and he just shits himself now at random. So when we say, what does that smell? We go, it depends.
It depends. Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's what we call Toby's diaper.
Yeah.
Not going to defend yourself at all?
I'll get you. Don't you worry.
I'm scared. We have another episode planned.
Yeah, you don't even know what's coming.
Oh, boy. Neither do you. That's why you wear those depends. Well, Terry, man, we really appreciate you joining us for our BS here. Is there anything you'd like to plug?
Oh, gosh. Well, I would say check us out, www.avenue.systems, if you're looking for an integration firm to partner with, or someone that's just got some ministry background that can help understand and guide through a process. We're more than happy to be a part. People are why we exist, and we want to help them achieve their goals and do it in a manner that keeps integrity and open communication up front. And one of the phrases that we use all the time is, if something's worth doing, it's worth doing well. So we want to be able to partner in a very open, transparent way and help you achieve what your goals are and do it well.
Love it.
Toby, I can see now how you made it through Exponential. Terry is so wise. I'm sure he carried that presentation.
Adult supervision, man.
Holding adult supervision, holding the man with adult diapers, just getting him through the finish line.
Yeah, it's like I would say something to the room full of people, and they would look at Terry, and they're like, "Is that right?" And he'd be like, "Well, it depends."
Yeah, exactly.
Do you want the speakers to fall on you and kill you, or not?
Golly.
Yeah, depends on who's standing under them, maybe.
Oh, yeah. Next time you come into this podcast room, you're going to see some speakers hanging over your head.
It's like the road runner just trying to run up in here. Well, Terry, man, we really appreciate you joining us for the podcast today.
Thank you so much. I have enjoyed it. It was great to talk with you guys.
Thanks for hanging out with us. We hope to see you back next week for more absurd stories, tech takeaways, and overall buffoonery here at the Church Gear Studios.
All right, Blake, will you get a paycheck this week? It depends.
Is this podcast good information or just information? It depends. If you think it, is good, what should they do, Toby?
It depends, but you should share it with your friends on, socials and other places where people look at stuff.
And I depend upon you sharing that because otherwise Toby's not going to pay me.
No, because if you don't, it might